We'll begin. Okay, so before we can talk directly about the Book of Job, we have to talk about the group of books to which it belongs in the Hebrew Bible, because there is actually a specific family of books to which it belongs. There is a specific climate that we have to understand before we can genuinely understand the Book of Job, right? Without misinterpreting it. Hold on a second. Let me make sure I have pure speaker view. Okay, so because the reason we're going to do this first, right, look at the group of books to which it belongs, is that the Book of Job has been, in my view, grossly misinterpreted throughout the centuries, right? We have interpreted this book to mean that if you're faithful to God, all will be well. You have to submit, you have to, kind of just obey and surrender to God, and in the end, right, he will save you. I don't believe this is the actual meaning of the Book of Job, and I'm going to show you, of course, throughout our study why I think so, right? So, but this meaning, this traditional meaning, comes, in my view, because we have studied Job in isolation from the family of books to which it belongs, which are called the wisdom books of the Hebrew Bible. So, in order to really understand the atmosphere of the Book of Job, how shall I put it, the climate, right? We have to understand these kinds of books, these wisdom books. What is their style? What's their approach? What's their worldview? And only then can we really understand the Book of Job. So today I'm going to introduce you to the wisdom literature of the Hebrew Bible, and then we'll go briefly into the Book of Job. So I'm going to put a few things in the chat. First of all, does anybody know what are the three main sections of the Hebrew Bible? Hebrew Bible is grouped in three main families of writings. Does anybody know in the class what these are?
I don't know what they're called in English, but in Hebrew, it's Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, which I guess is Bible, prophets, and writings.
Yes. Exactly, right? Bible. So the Torah, the prophets, the writings. Okay, so let me write this down for everybody. So the Hebrew Bible is divided in three sections. Number one, you have the 5 books of Moses, right? Which is the Torah. Number two, you have the prophets. And number 3, you have what we call the writings, or what I will call wisdom literature. Okay, so we need to understand how the wisdom literature is in fact radically different from the rest, from the prophets and from the 5 books of Moses. It's a different climate, it's a different atmosphere, it's a different worldview. And so we have to know this before we can properly understand the Book of Job, right? So, so let's talk a little bit about the wisdom books. First of all, what books are classified in the wisdom books? Give me some examples of the books that are in that section. Anybody know?
I think the only one I read is Ecclesiastes.
Yes, Ecclesiastes. Anybody else know anything else? So we have a Song of Songs, the Book of Job, Proverbs, right? These are the main ones, right? Daniel sometimes, but let's not talk about this one. Okay, so basically these are the main ones. There is a few more, right? But these are the ones. Ruth, I think also, yes, very good, right? Ruth, maybe even Esther. I'd have to check, but these are kind of the, what I would like to call the rebel books of the Hebrew Bible, right? In other words, they are the books that are not often examined, they're not often studied within either the Christian or the Jewish traditions, right? In Christianity, you hardly hear about them, right? You can go to a church, you will hear mostly about the Gospels, you will hear mostly about the stories in the book of Genesis, but you will rarely hear about these books. In the Jewish tradition, if you go to a synagogue, you will hear the prophets read every week, you will hear the 5 books of Moses read every week, but these books, to be fair, they are studied, but rarely, maybe once a year, right, at a given festival. So these are the books that I would like to call the lost and forgotten books of the Hebrew Bible. Let me write this down, right? Lost and forgotten books. They are the books that have been neglected, right? They are the black sheep of the family. And so today we're going to look at why these books usually are not addressed by the clergy, right? Rabbis, pastors, priests tend to not to want to teach these books, right, to their audiences. So we're going to understand today why. Why are these books kind of, put in the back drawer? Why are they the lost and forgotten books? Why have they been so neglected? Today we're going to understand why, and then we're going to see more about the book of Job. So I'm dividing this description of the wisdom books into 3 sections. So the main reason why they are neglected, in my view, is because of these 3 characteristics which make the clergy uncomfortable. Okay, let me make sure everyone understand what I mean by clergy. Clergy are the religious teachers, right? Whether it's rabbis or priests or pastors, right? Clergy. Okay, so today we're going to look at 3 points that will help you understand why these books in general are not make the clergy uncomfortable, right? So point number 1, I'll say them all and then I'll go into detail. These books are human-centered. Point number 2, they are universal. I'm typing it in the chat just so you know. And number 3, they are subversive. Okay, so we're going to look at these 3 points. That's the outline of today. These books are human-centered, universal, subversive. And these are the reasons why these books tend to be avoided. Okay, so let's look first at human-centered, right, or anthropocentric. So first of all,
sorry, I had a problem with my Wi-Fi or my thing just. I don't know if anyone else is having this issue. Can you just repeat what you said, because I did not get any of it. Mine completely shut off.
So just 3 sections. I haven't said much yet. These books are different from the rest of the Hebrew Bible in 3 points. And I wrote it in the chat. They're anthropocentric, universal, and subversive. So I'm just about to explain human-centered. They're human-centered, universal, subversive. Okay, human-centered. Can anyone tell me, for those of you who have read some of these books, anyone who has read Ecclesiastes or the Book of Job or Song of Songs, can anyone tell me what is the main speaker, or let me ask the question differently. If you look at the 5 books of Moses, who is the person doing most of the speaking in the 5 books of Moses? Who is doing most of the speaking in the 5 books of Moses? Does anybody know? Okay, God, very good, right? So when you open the book of Genesis, right, first page, you have the creation of the universe, and God is the one doing all of the speaking, right? The book actually begins in the beginning, right? God created the heavens and the earth, and God spoke, right? And then you have a series of 7 words where God is speaking reality into being, right? And then you have the rest of the stories that come after that, the patriarchs, the matriarchs. And again, God is seen as the main speaker, right? God spoke to Abraham, God spoke to Isaac, God spoke to Jacob. He's speaking, right? And people are more or less answering, right? Then you get to the book of Exodus with and the rest of the books of the 5 books of Moses, and now you have God expounding on his law, and you have the 10 commandments, and then you have all of the commentary on that, right? So really God is taking over. He's taken up the whole space, right, of the 5 books of Moses. He's the one doing most of the speaking. Now, in the book of the prophets, who is doing most of the speaking? It's a tricky question. So when you have prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, who is doing most of the speaking in these books, for those of you who know?
Each prophet?
Yes, but the prophet is speaking for who?
For God.
Exactly. So God is still speaking, right? Even though the prophet is speaking, he's just the mouthpiece of God, right? He's not saying what he wants to say, right? He's saying what God is speaking through him. So again, right? Anytime the prophet is speaking, he begins by saying, thus says the Lord, thus says the Lord, thus says the Lord. Still God is speaking. Now, when you get to the wisdom books, there is a shift. Who is doing most of the speaking in the wisdom books? That's an easy question. In the book of Job, in the book of Ruth, in the book of Song of Songs.
Human beings.
Exactly. You have a profound shift right there. In these wisdom books, human beings take center stage, right? God recedes in the backstage. We take the spotlight, right? And we are the ones doing most of the speaking. And God is, in fact, in some of these books, God is not even mentioned, right? The book of Ruth, in passing. Esther, barely. Ecclesiastes, just mentioned so you can complain about him, right? Book of Song of Songs, one mention, right? So it's very interesting, right? And so this, of course, you can see how this would make clergy uncomfortable. Like, wait a second, where is God? Where is the revelation, right? These books are just human beings. Why should we care about these books, right? Now, when you look at what the human beings are talking about, what are they talking about? Are they talking about God? Are they talking about the commandments or how to worship? What are they talking about in these books in general? Does anybody know? So Song of Songs, what are they talking about? Job, Ecclesiastes.
I guess they're all talking about the human condition. They're struggling with what's
Exactly.
going on.
Exactly. These books are not at all focused on the religion. They're not focused on the law, on the rituals, on how to praise God. These books are entirely focused on human beings and their issues and struggles, right? These books talk about everything. They talk about love. They talk about rebellion. They talk about anxiety. They talk about death. They talk about pleasure. They talk about, let's see, I think that's it, right? So suffering, obviously, with the book of Job, right? So these are human issues, human themes, right? Again, human-centric. They're not concerned about God and how to worship God. They don't care, right? They're only concerned about what interests us as human beings. They're the first existentialist books of the Bible, right? They talk about life. That's what they talk about. They're not interested in anything else, right? So already you can see, if you're a pastor, if you're a rabbi, and you're like looking at this, you're like, why should I teach this, right? Why am I going to teach it? I want to talk about God, right? I want to speak and teach God's words. Here, God is not even mentioned, right? So you can already sense the beginning of a discomfort, right? In the clergy. Okay. Moving to the second one, universal. This is another feature of these books that makes people uncomfortable, right? Now, universal has two subtitles, right? First of all, they're universal in the sense of the themes. The themes are universal. And then second, the characters. Characters or the authors are universal. Okay, so I put that in the chat. So they're universal in the sense thematic content is universal, and also the characters and the writers are universal. So let me explain. So we just saw this, right? These books, are they talking about Judaism? Are they talking about, the Hebrew religion? No, right? These books are talking about life. They're talking about existence. And so you can already sense as you're reading these books that the target audience, make sure you write this down, right? The target audience doesn't seem to be a religious audience or a Jewish audience, right? It seems that the authors are targeting another audience because they are writing about life in general. In other words, they're interested in reaching beyond the walls of Jerusalem to what the Hebrews call the nations, right? They're interested in talking about life, what it means to be a human being, not what it means to be a Hebrew or a Jew, right? They're talking about what does it mean to be a human being? How can we face death? How can we love each other? How do we overcome despair, right? These are the themes. So first of all, you can sense already that the scope of the books, very broad. They're targeting, make sure you write this down, they're targeting a universal audience. They're not written specifically for a religious audience. In fact, I would venture to say, and we're going to see why in the third section, that if you have a religious background, you will have a harder time understanding these books than if you don't, right? If you have no religious background, if you're an agnostic or an atheist, you will navigate these books very smoothly. These books will resonate with you, right? If you have a religious background, it's going to be harder because these books were not written for a believing audience. They were written for broader audience. So if you're part of that broader audience, you will resonate more with these books than somebody who grew up all their lives in the synagogue or in the church, right? This is interesting. So now, second aspect of universal is the aspect of the characters or the authors. So this is very interesting part. Let's take, for example, the Song of Songs, right? How many of you have read the Song of Songs? Actually, I can't see your faces, so never mind. I'll just imagine your answer. Song of Songs is a beautiful poem, right, in the Hebrew Bible about love. I study it with my classes in Wisdom of Love class that I teach. It's a beautiful poem. In that book, the main character, the woman, is she a Hebrew? Does anybody know? What does she say about herself that tells us that she might not be a Hebrew? Anybody know or remember? Nobody knows? Seriously?
Yeah, I mean, she talks about the foreign land, right? He's from a foreign land? Well, she is.
She describes herself as dark-skinned, right?
Yes.
She describes herself as a non-native, right? She's not part of the Hebrew nation. She's darker. She's probably coming from the southern regions, right? So we have here a main character who is not only a woman, but she's not a Hebrew. She's not even a convert, right? She's completely outside of the context of the system, right? And yet she's the one who has been chosen to teach us about love. This is one of the founding texts on love in the Hebrew tradition. And the one teaching us is neither a man nor a Jew, it's a woman of African descent, right? So this is very interesting, right? Now, if you look at the book of Proverbs, you get a question of authorship there, which is interesting. If you look at the last set of Proverbs, does anybody know where the authors come from of the few last Proverbs in the book of Proverbs? They're not Hebrew. Does anybody know what nation they belong to? This is this is a trickier question. You might not know this answer. Okay, let me set up the answer, because to really understand how subversive what is going on, you need to understand these nations. So if you recall, little introduction, quick parentheses in Jewish history, right? Remember I told you last time, the Hebrews started as a bunch of nomads in the land of present-day Israel. Then they migrated to Egypt and became a nation there for around 400 years. Then they came back into the present-day Israel. And of course, the country wasn't empty. You had their nations called the Canaanites. I'm writing it in the chat, right? The Canaanites. Now, these nations, when you read the 5 books of Moses, they're described as despicable, immoral, wretched, brutal nations that must be exterminated, right? So genocide, right? Because they're so morally depraved, right? That's the reason that's given. These nations are so morally depraved, they deserve to be wiped off the face of the earth. That's what you get in the 5 books of Moses, right? Now, when you get into the book of Proverbs, very interesting. You have something else going on. The last few Proverbs, including the celebrated Proverb 31 that is read every Friday night in Jewish households to praise the woman, right? That proverb, this set of Proverbs, was actually written by Canaanite sages. This is insane. This is a nation supposed to be immoral and depraved, and here they are contributing to the biblical revelation, right? That's another shocking element, right? So make sure you write this down, that in terms of the authorship, you have not only people from the nations, but people from nations which was supposed to be exterminated, they're contributing to the divine revelation. It's insane, right? And finally, of course, you have, let's see, make sure I have everybody. You have the book of Job, which is, again, right, we'll see the protagonist described in the book of Job is neither a Hebrew, he's kind of a generic Middle Eastern patriarch. He could be anybody. He could be a Palestinian, a Jew, an Arab. He's just described in generic terms as a patriarch of the desert over there, right? Okay, so you can see now how not only the themes are universal, but the characters, the authorship is also universal. Now, quick question to get you thinking. Why do you think that the Hebrew writers who are writing the Hebrew Bible, why would they include these other voices, right? The voices of the Canaanite sages, the voice of an African woman, the voice of the Palestinian patriarch, right? Why do you think these voices are included? Anybody know? Have an idea? In other words, why are they not satisfied to just have a Hebrew authorship? Why do they think that they need to bring in these foreign voices? What is important? What is this telling us about Revelation, that they are including these foreign voices? I'm waiting for your answer. See, you're all thinking. No answer? You're not
No, I'll give it a stab.
Thank you.
I guess for the universal, it's not only one voice. It's not coming from a specific, just this one point of view. You have a more universal voice from different points of view in society or different parts.
And why do they think it's important to bring in these other voices? What's the point? What can you say about that? Okay, yes, I have a few other answers. I have Kestenbaum saying Revelation is accessible to all and not limited to one ethnicity. Excellent, right? I'll come back to that. We have progression. What do you mean, Cancino, by progression? Can you explain to us?
Just to show the world as a whole, like everything's like progressing and not everything's just kind of like this like one idea of like whatever, you know what I'm saying? Because like I know like back then there was like the idea of like one God, and then like everyone kind of like trickles down and starts believing in their own things to show like different like I guess sides and theories.
Okay, very good, right? The idea is that according to the Hebrew writers, you cannot access wisdom by yourself, right? We need other voices. We need each other. We need the voice of the African woman. We need the voice of the Canaanite sages. We need the voice of the Palestinian patriarch in order to have a full picture of not only what it means to be human, but what God is, right? You can't have a clear vision of God coming from one single ethnicity or religion, right? They are aware that to have a clear vision of God, to have a clear vision of Revelation, to have a clear vision of what it means to be human, we need everybody to be at the table, right? This is so important. I wanted to open a parenthesis on that because this is something which really needs to happen even today, right? We have a society, just to be a little bit relevant, we have a society where key positions are not yet diverse enough, right? And we want to build a civilization. We can't, according to these thinkers, right? We can't get to a civilized nation where we have wisdom, where we have justice, if not everybody has a place at the table. And we live in a society where only a few people have a seat at the table, right? Only a few people have a seat at the table of government or of medicine or of academia, right? Theology, right? So what we're learning from this particular from what these writers were doing is that to build, to really access wisdom, to really access truth, we need everybody at the table, right? We need the African woman, the Palestinian sage, and the Canaanite sages, the Palestinian patriarch, and the Hebrew, right, writers need to work together. That's how you reach truth. That's how you reach civilization, right? We are not yet in a civilized society today because we only have one minority making the decisions, right? And so this is what we're learning. Wisdom, the true governance, right? The true civilization comes only when we work together, right? So that's definitely one reason. The other one that I'm seeing here from Trujillo is absolutely right. If you're from the nations and you're seeing yourself in the text, it's easier also to read and to understand. It's also a way to make this text accessible, right, to the nations. So excellent, right? So yes, I will need you to participate more, right? You can, if you don't want to talk, you can just chat it. I'm going to, and then I'll say it myself. Very good. Okay, let's go to the last one. This is the worst one. This is the one that really makes the clergy cringe. And this is the subversive element of these books, right? Okay, so let me just give you a quick overview of how some of these other texts are subversive, so you have an idea of the climate, and then we'll go more deeply into the book of Job. If you look at the Song of Songs, and I really invite you to read these books, right? Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, Proverbs, try to read those. It won't take you long, maybe an hour, just to get an idea of the atmosphere of the wisdom books, right? So Song of Songs, profoundly subversive. Main reason, the woman is at the center. She is the one doing the teaching, right? Not only that, but if you look at that book a little bit, you will see that when it comes to love, she's transgressing every rule. Every societal rule and custom she is transgressing when it comes to being with her beloved. So there's a lot going on there in terms of transgression, subversion. She initiates the relationship. There is no mention of the father. She's doing what she wants with this guy, going wherever she wants to. So you already have very strong subversive climate in that book, right? If you look at Ecclesiastes, same thing. You have there, Ecclesiastes is a monologue of someone who despairs of life, right? So the whole book is a long lament about how life is absurd, because the main issue is that, you know, what's the point of being righteous if in the end we all die, right? Why should I make efforts to be moral if in the end I end up in the grave next to the criminal over here who had a good time his whole life, right? That's one of the premises of the book, right? So this book is also one of the most ancient books which contains the affirmation of the death of God. In other words, we will see with Nietzsche that he, right, pronounces God dead. This is in the 19th century. Well, Ecclesiastes did so thousands of years before. In the book, you have a very powerful passage where he says he's looking at the oppression, he's looking at the chaos, political and social chaos that is around him. And he says, when I look at this, I realize that there is no comforter. And the word comforter in the Hebrew Bible is one of the names of God. So basically what he's saying is there is no God. There can be no God in this chaos, right? So you have that. Now, Book of Job, of course, is very subversive too. And we're going to see how, but let me just give you a head start, right? Main idea of the Book of Job goes against everything that the 5 books of Moses teach us about obeying God, right? Now, anybody remember what is the consequence of obeying God according to the 5 books of Moses? What happens to the people who obey and surrender to God? What is their reward? Anybody know? If you have the answer, speak up so we can move on. Or put in the chat if you're shy. Okay, Trujillo, why are you saying that? What is the reward for obeying God?
Oh, are you listening?
Yes, go ahead.
I misunderstood. Okay. I thought, what is the reward for not obeying God?
Death, yes, absolutely. Well, you're right. For not obeying God is death, and if you obey God, you get life, prosperity, fertility, and so forth, right? So there's a clear cause and effect in the 5 books of Moses between your actions and the divine blessings. So make sure you write this down, because this is the key thing that the book of Job is going to subvert, right? So let me say it again. In the 5 books of Moses, in general in the Hebrew Bible, the philosophy is this: if I follow God, if I'm a good person, I will be rewarded, right? God will bless me. If I'm a bad person, God will curse me, right? I will have all kinds of problems. I will die ultimately, right? Now, Book of Job, you're going to see, it all works until you get to the Book of Job. Because in the Book of Job, as you're going to see, you have a man, Job, who is the perfect believer. He keeps everything meticulously, right? And yet you see God himself lobbying the devil so that he can destroy his life, right? You have God himself telling the devil, be my guest, destroy his life, right? Let's see what happens. Experiment. Let's experiment on this guy, right? So this is a complete reversal of everything that we've learned so far in the Hebrew Bible. Basically, what Book of Job is saying is if you follow God, you're not going to be blessed. You're going to be cursed. You're going to suffer. You're going to go through all kinds of problems. That's what's going to happen to you if you're faithful to God, right? So it's a complete reversal. It is going against every prosperity gospel that we know of, right? Speaking of prosperity gospel, let me write it down. Prosperity gospel. This is something that is this is a trend which is especially powerful in the United States, right? If you look at the way that, especially Christianity, the way that it is preached, right? In many, many mega churches, right? If you listen to some evangelists on TV, it's all about if you follow God, if you plant a seed, God will bless you, right? There's a lot. If you go to Barnes and Nobles, to the Christian section, right? I go there occasionally. Well, I used to before this quarantine, right? You will see so many books on how God can prosper you, how God can make you rich, how God can make you healthy, right? There is a strong sense in our country that God is there to make us prosper. And that all we have to do is align ourselves with God, and then we will have natural prosperity, right? We are closely connected in this civilization. We are connecting God to the American dream, right? God is supposed to help us prosper. We have a strong belief like this. A lot of us believe that if I'm a good person, God will bless me. Until you get to the book of Job. This will destroy your illusions, right? We're going to see something completely different going on in the book of Job. Okay, so now you get in that kind of idea of the atmosphere of these books, right? They're human-centered. God is not talking. He's in the background. They're universal. You sense that the target audience is the nations, the target audience is non-religious, right? Blade, do you have a question?
In regards to what you were just talking about, in regards to aligning the American dream with God, is that what, when I was reading it, is that what's understood as Calvinism?
Yeah, so you have, Protestantism.
Mm.
If you read the book by Weber, right, Protestantism and the Ethics of Capitalism, you have this idea, right, that God rewards hard work. So we have in this country this idea that if you're rich, well, that's God that rewarded you. And if you're poor, well, probably you did something wrong, right?
Right. That's what
Exactly.
when I was reading the parts of Book of Job with Bildad and his other friend, that's kind of the idea I got across, that they were communicating that you are likely, the reason you're suffering right now is either your children committed sin or you have committed sin and you're not acknowledging it.
Exactly. And we have the same mindset here. This is why it's so important to study the book of Job, because we are the same. We are the same. The context is the same, right?
Right.
We do have a sense that if someone is poor, they're somehow morally depraved. That's why they're poor, right? God is cursing them. They did something wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the book of Job is there to really give us a deeper view of what's going on, right? Very good. Excellent connection. I agree.
Thank you.
Right, very good. So yes, the book of Job is there to show us that, well, sometimes this is not as simple, right? To be rich doesn't necessarily mean you are morally pure, and to be poor and suffering and wretched doesn't mean you are far from God. In fact, it could mean the exact opposite, right? As we'll see with Job, right? So very good, excellent. So okay, so I was just summarizing the 3 points: human-centered, universal, make sure you write these down, and subversive, right? We saw that these books are somewhat rebellious. They go against the dominant worldview of the Hebrew Bible. They subvert many of the rituals and the principles, right? So here's my question to you. Why do you think, right? In fact, in spite of the fact that these books are so off, they're so out there, there's such black sheep, right, in the nice enclosure of other sheep, right? Why do you think these books still have a place in the what we call the canon or the biblical scripture? Why have they not been removed? Why are they important? Let's see if you can get that. I'm really getting you, I'm warming you up for the class today. I'm getting you to speak so it can be easier in the future.
I feel like
go ahead. Yeah,
I feel like they have a presence in the canon because these are thoughts that a lot of believers eventually come across in their spiritual journey.
Okay, very good, right? So first point, right? And then I'll get to the other person, right? First point, excellent. We can write all of these points down. There are many ways to answer this question, right? Number one, when you see that other people are struggling in their spiritual journey, like people in these books, right? The people in these books, they're not the standard, cookie cutter Christian or cookie cutter Jew. They're a little bit on them doing, they're meandering, right? They're making mistakes, they're stumbling around. So if you yourself are stumbling around, it's nice to have a guide. And I sometimes say that this is the Bible of the misfits. The wisdom books is the Bible for those who have lost their way. That's their Bible. If you've lost your way, you really have no need for the 5 books of Moses. Not gonna work the prophets. If you've lost your way, there's a Bible for you. is the wisdom books, right? This is the scripture for those who have lost their way, those who have abandoned the path of truth, right? So very good. Yes, absolutely. These books are written so that if we ourselves are going through confusion, we can find, we can resonate with some of the characters in these books. They're not perfect. They're not, they're not the perfect Christian or Jew. They're thinking, they're transgressing, they're rebelling, right? So if we are in the same state, we can resonate well with these characters. I see another answer. Yes, Trujillo, they're teaching us the human condition. There's a human dimension. This is so important. I want to emphasize this. When we study Nietzsche, we're going to see this too. In the Hebrew context, you cannot be spiritual if you're not capable of being human. Let me say that again, because this is really important, right? In the Hebrew context, in the Hebrew Bible, especially here, you can't be spiritual if you're not also profoundly, deeply human. And what I mean by that is that if you're not aware of your limitations, of your fragility, if you're not connected to your emotions, right? If you're not able to feel, right? You can't be spiritual, right? So remember this point, because this is going to tie into what Nietzsche is going to say later on. The prerequisite to being spiritual is first to be human. And this goes against everything that we know, right? If you study religion, whether it's in Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, there is this view that to be truly spiritual, you have to leave behind your humanity. You have to be less human, more angelic, right? This is the opposite here. You have to, the more human you are, the more capable you are of a deep spiritual experience. So we're going to talk about that. Very good. Any other reason why you think these books are necessary? In other words, what would spirituality look like without these books? What kind of believers would we have without these books?
I was going to say, you don't really have thinkers, right? You're just having people that are kind of following and serving God. And so you're not questioning anything. You're just basically, you're not questioning why things happen, right?
Excellent. Very good. Right. One of the main reasons why these books are still there is to show the importance of the human voice, response, and question. Let me elaborate on that a little bit. Right. And let me make sure all of you are muted, because some of you are popping up. So hold on. Okay. Here we are. Okay. So let me explain. Let me explain briefly what I mean by that. We have to realize that the Hebrew religion, the Hebrew spiritual worldview that is unraveled in the Hebrew Bible, is a worldview of what I would call a covenant. It is a covenant religion. In other words, it's not a religion where God is the supreme authority and we're supposed to submit. A covenant is another word for marriage, right? Now, what's the sign of a healthy marriage? Let's have a little bit of relationship 101. What's the sign of a healthy marriage? Yes, very good, Kestenbaum. Arguing. In other words, both are able to stand up and speak to each other and stand their ground and express what they feel. There's not one submitting to the other, right? A real marriage, I'm going against tradition, but a real marriage is one where both have a voice. There is two people, not one, right, taking over the other, right? So this is what we have in the Hebrew context. We have a marriage between God and people. And so if you're going to have a healthy marriage, you can't have one person taking over everything. You can't have one person doing all the talking, all the deciding, and so forth. You need the other to also have a say. These wisdom books are the platform that is given to humanity to talk back to God. This is the place where you can talk back. Right? You're told at home not to talk back. Here we have a whole platform set up so that human beings can talk back, can respond. And they're not talking back nicely either, right? The way they're talking back is pretty raw, it's pretty uncut, it's pretty, it's unfiltered. Some of them are angry, some of them are cynical, some of them straight up ignore, indifferent, right? But they're talking back, right? We're gonna see Job talk back. Over the course of our reading, right? So it is so important in the Hebrew context that the human being have a space to think, to feel, to doubt, to rebel, to disagree. You can't have a genuine spiritual journey if you don't have a voice, right? If you don't have a personality. Let me tell you a story to illustrate this. This is a very, very good story that will really highlight what I'm saying right now. Okay, this is a story found in the Talmud. So does anybody know what is the Talmud? I'm writing it down in the chat. What is the Talmud? Anybody know? I know some of you know. So
I gave it a shot.
go ahead.
After it was the kind of the larger elaboration of the Mishnah, which was written during the times of the Second Temple. It was kind of like not a codification of Jewish law that came later, but it was a collection of Jewish ethics, of Jewish daily life, but also, yeah, of laws as well. And so the Talmud goes off on tangents a lot and goes into like the esoteric and the mystical, but it's also like very practical daily laws.
Okay, very good. Detailed description, right? Talmud is basically, let me summarize a little bit what he said. It's a summary, it's a compilation of all of the discussions of the rabbis about the Hebrew Bible. Okay, so let me make sure everybody know what a rabbi is, right? A rabbi is a Jewish teacher, right? So these are the rabbis talking about the Hebrew Bible. They're discussing, they're commenting, they're making their opinions, right? The Talmud is just, in a nutshell, a compilation of all of these discussions, right? So their stories, their arguments, whatever you want, you will find in that book. And it's very long, several volumes, right? It's like almost like 5 feet long, how many volumes you have in the Talmud, right? So in the Talmud, there's a story. And the story depicts a bunch of rabbis who got together to study. And so they're happy, they start with the book of Genesis, and they read the first few chapters, and they're like, yeah, this is nice, and so forth. And then they get to the story of Noah. Everybody knows Noah? Noah, you saw the movie with the boat, what's that movie called? With that actor?
Russell Crowe.
Yeah, it's Russell Crowe. Everybody saw the movie? Let me put you all on a gallery view. Put your hand out if you saw the movie with Russell Crowe. That's it for 4 people. Y'all are missing out. What was it called? Noah? What was the name of that movie?
Yeah, Noah.
Noah. Okay. Your assignment is to go see the movie Noah with Russell Crowe on Netflix or whatever, right? This is Noah. But let me make sure. Does everybody know who Noah is? Like, even if you didn't see the movie. Who doesn't know who Noah is? Raise your hand. Oh, really? Everybody knows. Saying you don't know. Okay. Kestenbaum, you don't know who Noah is?
Oh, I thought I said if you do know. Sorry.
No, you
Ignore
don't.
me.
Okay. Saying you don't know who Noah is. Okay. Noah is okay, we'll talk about you'll figure it out as as we go into the story. So Noah, so they get to the story of Noah, and there the whole atmosphere changes, and they're like, who is this guy? What the hell's wrong with this guy? We hate this guy. This guy is pathetic, right? So they hate him so much they even want to stop the study session. They want to go home. They're really annoyed, right? But then they say, okay, let's continue a little bit. They continue a few chapters and they meet Abraham. Okay, let me make sure everybody knows who is Abraham. Who doesn't know who is Abraham? Let me see your hand. Jenkins. Okay, you'll find out. Okay, good. At least most of you know, so you can follow. So they get to Abraham and they're there. We love this guy. He's the man. They're so happy. They pour a little bit of vodka. You know, they're drinking at the health of Abraham. They start a dance, right? And everything. They're so happy. Now, here's my question to you. Why did the rabbis despise Noah but love Abraham? What is the difference between Noah and Abraham? This is a difficult question. Let's see if you can think it through. See if you have an idea. Think hard. It's philosophy of religion. So any takers for why they love Abraham but they hate Noah? What's the difference between the two men? What did Noah do that was so bad? What's wrong with Noah? Let's start with Noah. What's wrong with Noah? What did he do? Take a wild guess.
I mean, he built the ark, right? He put
Yeah.
all of the.
So far, so good. So what was wrong with the way he built the ark? There was something, what was off with the way he did it? How many people did Noah save?
Oh, none. Only him and his wife, that's a confusing story, but because we don't
Yes,
know how things replicated from there on, but I don't want to get
good.
too.
So excellent. Bernard, yes, no humans. Kestenbaum, this is the one. Yes, Kestenbaum, you got it, right? This is the idea. God comes to Noah, tells Noah, by the way, I just thought you should know, I'm about to destroy the world. And what does Noah do? What does he say? Nothing,
Nothing.
right? Now, what would you do, right? God comes to you, tells you, by the way, I thought you should know, we're buddies. I'm about to destroy the world. What would you have the decency to say back? Hopefully. Some of us yes, Bernard, yes, exactly. But some of us, right now, yes, it would be nice to see the whole world destroyed. I agree. This is a bad time to comment this text, right? But most of us would have some compassion on our fellow human beings and would be like, wait a second, what? Are you sure you want to do that? Is this a good idea? Have you had breakfast? Do you need something to eat for your blood sugar to run again? Like, are you sure you're making the right decision? But we would have the decency to talk back. Noah submits. And the rabbis find this kind of submission despicable. Right? There's something wrong with the way Noah submits. He doesn't speak up. Now, same scenario with Abraham, same story. God comes to Abraham. Same thing. He says, by the way, we're buddies. I thought you should know, I'm about to destroy these two cities over there, Sodom and Gomorrah. And what does Abraham do now? Who remembers the story apart from Kestenbaum? What does he say? Does he say, yeah, cool, good idea, great idea, let me come with you? Is that what he says? Mute yourself, Trujillo, you're always coming up on the screen. Good.
Oh, he pleaded for them. He said, if there is one people good, could you save them? Or 10
Okay.
people, 7 people. And then they didn't find anyone good.
Okay, excellent, very good, right?
Only
Abraham,
his nephew.
exactly, right? Abraham hears this and he's like, whoa, what? What did you say? And then he begins, like in the supermarket, to bargain with God. He's like, well, what if there's 10 righteous people in the city? Are you going to destroy the city? And God is like, he thinks about it a little bit and then he's like, no, you're right. That's a good point. No, I won't destroy it if there's 10 people. 50 people. And Abraham is like, he's thinking and he knows the cities very well. And he's like, I know there's not 50 people who are righteous in that city. So he goes down 40, 30, 20, 10. And then the rabbis again burst into tears. Because if Abraham had continued to bargain, right, beyond 10, perhaps God would never have destroyed the cities at all, right? So we have this story. The rabbis are just so happy of the way that Abraham contradicts God, right? Disagrees with God. And in a way, because Abraham disagreed with God, God became more God, right? This is a paradox, right? God was able to save Lot, Abraham's nephew, and so forth because of what Abraham had done. So you see here the difference. What we have in the Hebrew Bible is an Abrahamic faith. It's not a Noahic faith, right? Let's distinguish between Noahic faith and, I'm writing it down, Abrahamic faith, right? The Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew worldview holds a very important space for the human voice, the human demand, the human doubt, the human question, the human rebellion are all important. In fact, I would venture to suggest that God enjoys human beings when they speak up, right? That's why Abraham was called the friend of God, because he talked back. God doesn't want a bunch of people to submit to him like he's some kind of big, I don't know what, right? He wants a conversation. This is what we forget often when we're talking about God. We imagine him on a throne wanting, to be worshipped. This is not the God we have here. right? In the Hebrew Bible, you have a God who enjoys a good conversation, who enjoys a good challenge, who likes questions and doubts and passion and dissent, and he just relishes the opportunity to dialogue, right? So this is what we need to remember. If we want to really deepen our spirituality, we have to realize that there is a space. We have to open up a space for dissent, questions, doubts. This is the only, and in a way, this is considered to be part of the spiritual journey. Let me say that again so you can write it down, right? Yes, part of the spiritual journey is faith and obedience and submission. This is part of it, but it's not the only part. Another part is also disobedience, rebellion, and questions. They are both necessary to the spiritual journey. You cannot progress spiritually if you don't give yourself the space to doubt, to question, to rebel, to be angry. And these are features which we will find in the character of Job. And we will see that God, in the end, is pleased with this attitude, right? I'll say it again, God enjoys a good challenge, right? He's a kind of, I don't know how to say it. He likes, the back and forth. He likes the debates, right? God is a philosopher in a way. Okay, so now you have an idea of the climate. Any questions on the wisdom books in general? And the climate before we go specifically into the book of Job. Any questions? Everybody's clear? Okay, good. All right, so in the remaining minutes, let's talk a little bit about the book of Job. Trying to see what I'm gonna say. Okay, so first of all, make sure you write this down. What we're realizing is that the family of books to which Job belongs are books which are going to challenge us. Okay, they're not books which will fit within the traditional view of spirituality, right? They are non-traditional views, they are subversive views, right? So we should expect the book of Job to be the same. That's point number one. Make sure you have it down, right? We know that the book of Job belongs to a group of books which are challenging us, which are rebellious, which are subversive, which are not easy to read, especially if you come from a religious background, right? So we should expect the book of Job to be equally problematic, right? To go against the grain. So that's the first thing. Now, so knowing this, we know that the traditional interpretation, probably not the right one, right? Remember when I told you in the beginning? Traditional interpretation is that the book of Job is about submission, right? If you submit to God and you remain faithful no matter what, in the end, God will bless you. Traditional interpretation. Now, if you've seen the type of books that we're dealing with, this is telling us already that probably this interpretation not the right one. We are not dealing with a book teaching us to be obedient. Probably not, right? Make sure you write this down. Book of Job, I have to argue this, right, later on, but knowing what books the book of Job is a part of, right, knowing the family of books that it's a part of, this book is probably not going to be about obedience and submission. Most likely, probably going to be about rebellion and subversion, right, and how these are seen as virtues and not flaws, right? We're going to see that Job, in his rebellion, is appreciated, right? God appreciates him. He even celebrates him in his rebellion. We're going to see that. So the question, of course, is why? What's going on? Why is rebellion important? Why is it important as a believer to allow ourselves to go through rebellion and anger and doubt? Why is that important? We're going to find out, right, in the book of Job. Now, let me give you a few pointers before you read. Yes, thank you. Yes, Trujillo. Excellent, right? God, in a way, loves sincerity. So if you're angry, it's fine. If you're depressed, it's fine. You want to kill yourself, it's fine. As long as you're honest, we're good. We're in touch, right? The hypocrisy is the worst thing, right? There's no connection possible with hypocrisy. Okay. Good. All right, now let me introduce you briefly to the outline of the book, because the outline of the book is giving us a subliminal message. So if you don't understand what the author is telling us in the way he structured the book, you're gonna miss the message, okay? So here's a structure, 3 sections. Number 1, the prologue. Number 2, the dialogues. And this is between Job and his friends and Job and God, right? And number 3, the epilogue. Okay, this is the whole structure of the book. Prologue, dialogues, epilogue. Okay, now the author is going to write these 3 sections in different styles. In other words, and in doing so, he's giving us a subliminal message. He's trying to tell us something between the lines. Now you have to understand, right? When you're studying literature, this is a book of literature, right? When you're studying literature, the meaning is not only in the words, the meaning is also in how the words are written, right? That's what you have, for example, in poetry, right? You have the words, but then you have how the words are written that say something more, right? Make sure you understand this. So the author can also give you a message in the way that he writes. And what I'm going to show you today is that there is a subliminal message the author trying to tell us in the way that he writes each of these sections. So now, anybody who has read the book already, raise your hand. I'm looking at the whole screen. Okay, so you'll be able to tell me. Now, when you look at the prologue and the epilogue, and you compare these 2 sections with the dialogues, do you notice how the author shifts from one style to the other? Can anyone tell me how he writes the prologue? What is the style of the prologue? What is the style of the dialogues? And what is the style of the epilogue? Anybody know? Anybody sense a difference between the way he writes these 3 sections? See if you have a literary sensitivity. I'm waiting. So when he's writing the prologue, when he introduces the characters, he writes in a certain way. And then you start the dialogues between Job and his friends. Style shifts. The way it's written shifts. What shifts? What do you mean, Trujillo, by a myth? So the whole book is a myth. Whole book is a story, right? We know that. Whole book is a story, which may or may not have historical background. So we already know the whole thing is a myth, but then he shifts from 2 different styles. Now, what are the different styles of writing? Let me make a list. You have prose, you have poetry, you have, what else do you have? Verse, you have, this is what I mean by style, right? What is the style of the prologue? Anybody remember? Is it poetry?
No, it's not poetry.
Okay. Very good. Prologue, not poetry, is prose. Okay, that's what we mean when we say it's not poetry, it's prose, just written like once upon a time there was this and this, prose. Okay, so let me write this down. So the prologue isn't prose. What about the dialogues? What's the style? Is it prose still, or does it shift?
I would say poetry.
Okay, very good. Dialogues, all of a sudden there's a shift from a kind of bland way of writing, you know, just narrative. Now we have all of a sudden breaks into poetry. Whole section on the dialogues, whether Job is talking to his friends or Job is talking to God, poetic. And then we get to the epilogue, and what happens there? Is it prose or poetry, the epilogue?
It's back to prose.
Back to prose. Excellent. Okay. Everybody understands what I just did? The distinction between the 3? Now, there's a subliminal message. What is the author trying to tell us when he writes like this? In other words, where is the author's main message going to be? In the prologue, in the epilogue, or in the dialogues? Where's the author trying to get our attention to?
The dialogue.
The dialogues.
Very good, right? He writes in this way so that the readers will be drawn into the dialogues. In other words, write this down, right? The main point the author is going to make, whatever theology we're going to get out of this, whatever meaning we're going to get out of this, or answers, right, is going to be found in the dialogues, not in the prologue or in the epilogue. Those are not the important places. Does that make sense? This, you need to know this. I will explain why in a second. Right? In other words, if you want to get any sense of who God is, what does spirituality mean? what is the ideal believer, you should not go to the prologue or the epilogue. You will find it where the author is trying to draw our attention into the poetic sections. Now, why am I saying this? I'm saying this for this reason. A lot of you are gonna read the prologue and you're gonna be like, yeah, I don't like this God, right? The prologue, you have the story, remember? God is having a, coffee with the devil, right? And then the devil is like, I don't know. First of all, God is like boasting about Job, saying, oh, he's so amazing. Look at this guy. He's so perfect. And the devil is like, well, he's perfect because he knows he'll be rewarded. What happens when the reward goes away? And God is like, you have a point. All right, take everything away. Okay, this is the prologue, right? A lot of you are going to be like complaining in your essays. Yeah, what kind of God would allow this? Like, how can he do this, right? Now, what's the big mistake you just made? By talking about God, by coming to a conclusion about who God is based on the prologue. What's the big mistake you made? Why, in other words, why is your conclusion about who God is wrong? In as much as you took it from the prologue. In other words, is that what the author is trying to say?
No, I mean, he's talking about God within the dialogues. I mean, since I read a bunch of it today, there's a lot of questioning back and forth and a lot of statements, and Job rebutting what his friends are saying and questioning. So no, you don't get what the sense of God is in the prologue.
Very good. Very good. In the prologue. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just add on. There's no real. You see the actual engagement of God and the people throughout the dialogues versus the prologue, where they're kind of just describing the setting, so to speak.
Right. The prologue is not going to give us a real picture of God. It's not what the author is trying to teach us. The prologue is giving us what people think, right? Prologue is giving us what the what I would call, how should I put it? I say the word caricature, but no one ever understands me when I say that. So few of you will, but not everybody. Is being ironic, right? He's making fun of some people's view of God as this, right? So the prologue is giving us kind of it's setting up the story, but whatever is being said there is not the important thing. He's talking about views on God that his contemporaries have, and he's going to move away from these views into the poetic section. Am I making sense? This is really important everyone understands this. In other words, in the prologue, he has the traditional view of God, traditional view of what it means to be a believer, and then he's going to move away from that into a very new vision of God and a new vision of what it means to be a believer.
I guess you can say like the prologue and then the dialogue. Like the prologue is very like one-dimensional, and then like the dialogue is like multi-dimensional. And even if anyone who has studied like poetry, they know like poetry has like very like multi-dimensional language or like flowery language. So I guess like that is also like the difference between like the prose and the poetry. And just if you study like different styles, you'll know that like in general.
Okay, excellent, right? It's 1D, 2D, 3D, right? One-dimensional, caricature, ironic, right? Fake, into the real, what he's really trying to say. So anybody basing their views or basing their theology or basing their understanding of God on the prologue, I'm going to mark you wrong, right? -1. You're going to lose points, right? You can't do that in the book of Job, right? This is not, in the prologue, there is not an accurate view. The accurate view comes in the poetic section. And the same goes, by the way, for the epilogue. Epilogue is also, we have to be careful. This is also not a completely accurate view. The only accurate view we have is in the poetic section. Okay, so now we know this, so that when you're reading the prologue, you realize, we have to take it with a grain of salt. When you get into the poetry, that's where you start to pay attention. When you go back into the epilogue, again, a grain of salt, he's kind of being ironic, he's being sarcastic, or he's making a caricature. right? And this will be important. So when we start to talk about whether Job has a happy ending or not, right? The epilogue in the surface seems to be a happy ending, but remember, we can't trust the prologue and the epilogue. The author is saying, move away from those, right? So we know that the kind of simplistic happy ending in the epilogue can't be the real happy ending. Am I making sense with the epilogue? Is everybody convinced what I just said? Anybody misunderstand what? Okay, let me see. Who understands what I just said? Put your hand. Okay. All right, good. All right, just checking. Can't see you most of the time, so once in a while I check. Okay, good. Now you're ready, right? You can enter the book of Job and know that I have to ignore the prologue, I have to ignore the epilogue. The real meaning is gonna be in the dialogues. Okay, very good. All right, good. We're out of time. So tomorrow, Wednesday, we are going to really study the whole book together. You have your reading assignment, which is due, which you have to put in my Google Drives, right? So remember, the reading assignment is 1 page, single-spaced, 4 paragraphs, right? And you have this to do each time you have a reading. Remember, the paragraph is 2 questions, 2 critiques, and you put this in my Google Drive, right? This is when you go to the menu on Blackboard on the left, you have tests and assignments, you click there, boom, you put it in the folder on Job, response Job, okay? That's it. That's the only assignment you have so far. And of course, reading the whole book. I think that's it, right? That's the only thing. Good. Any questions on anything I said on the assignment or anything like that? Okay, good. Now, whoever, yes. Okay, so remember the audio question, if you came to this lecture, you don't need to do. You only do the reading assignment. So if you come to the lectures, you don't need to do the audio question. And yes, it's due before class tomorrow. You have to put it in the folder by then.